thưa quý ông, quý bà, sau 2 ngày làm việc hết sức khẩn trương với tinh thần thẳng thắn, cởi mở và tin cậy lẫn nhau, hội thảo quốc tế lần thứ 2 về Biển Đông đã đi đến hồi kết. Trong khi đó, theo tôi biết là vẫn nhiều vị muốn phát biểu ý kiến thêm nữa, nhưng mà thời gian không cho phép chúng ta có thêm thời gian để mà thảo luận tiếp. Vì vậy cho nên là chúng tôi hết sức là cảm ơn quý vị đã dành những tình cảm thẳng thắn, chân thành và cởi mở đến với hội thảo Biển Đông lần thứ 2 và cho phép tôi được điều hành phiên bế mạc hôm nay. Trước hết, chúng tôi nghĩ rằng bây giờ là cái lúc tổng kết, cho nên tôi đề nghị là các vị chủ trì từng phiên họp, từ phiên thứ nhất đến phiên thứ 8 sẽ đại diện cho từng phiên họp phát biểu những ý kiến tổng kết của hội thảo này. Mỗi vị xin dành khoảng 10 phút để các vị trình bày. Đầu tiên, tôi xin trân trọng kính mời giáo sư hay tổng kết phiên họp thứ nhất.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I chaired the first session looking at the significance of the South China Sea and the changing strategic landscape. I had two generals, one retired diplomat, and a Chinese scholar. We had two paradigms, the neo-realist one presented by the first three, the two generals and a diplomat, and a liberal institutionalist framework presented by our Chinese specialists. Three of the papers all raised the question of China's use of the word core interest for the South China Sea. General Vinod Saigal argued that Chinese assertiveness was a new interest through its declaration that the South China Sea was a core interest. And he felt that once that word had been added, whether it was used or not, that you could not go back to the status quo ante. The concept is out there that the South China Sea is a core interest, and whether there was Chinese policy or not, the damage has been done. And he speculated whether it was a new assertiveness by China, a well-thought-out plan, or the result of dissonance within the Chinese bureaucracy, or was it a testing of the waters? General Daniel Schaeffer from France also raised the question of China and the core interest and was puzzled by why China would be so serious and assertive over what it claims as its legitimate rights. And he identified the strategic significance of the South China Sea as economic strategic, the commercial traffic, and this strategic interest itself, that this was an attempt to encircle Taiwan. How does China impose hegemony over to assert its core interests? That's to reduce the pressure of the U.S., interpret the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea in its own particular way. Bronson Percival, a retired American diplomat and security analyst, began with the argument that the U.S. has had a consistent policy towards the South China Sea for 15 years, but U.S. interest has waxed and waned. To look at that, he suggested there were three different lenses. The dominant view is that the South China Sea is seen in the context of U.S.-Chinese bilateral relations. American primacy challenged by China's rise, with that reverberating in the South China Sea. Another view would be that the South China Sea is a main element in U.S.-ASEAN relations. And more broadly, a third lens was that the South China Sea is a crucial hinge. The U.S. really is an Asia-Pacific power, and it's that hinge in the security architecture linking Southeast and Northeast to East Asia as a distinct region itself. He made the important point, though, that the United States would prefer not to add South China Sea to the agenda in its relations either with China or with Southeast Asia. And how does America explain Chinese policy? Asked, was it to probe to see if the United States was resolved to maintain its position or weaken? Was it a natural outgrowth of Chinese power? Or was it no change in long-term Chinese policies, but it was a confident China now allowing finally an airing of these particular issues? Or was China stumbling into disputes with Vietnam, and it misjudged Vietnam's ability to draw in ASEAN and the United States. And he saw that China acted with mixed motivations for sovereignty, resources, sea lines of communications, and anti-access strategy. And in the end, he argued the U.S. policy was determined by 4 factors: not to be intimidated on fundamental principles, that relations were mixed between cooperation, rivalry, and competition, to strengthen ASEAN's role in the South China Sea, or those in America that were pleased with the development of growing relations with Vietnam. But he added that there was a minority view that the South China Sea presented the U.S. with an opportunity to test China. In contrast to those 3 neo-realist views, and that's a broad framework for me to apply, we had a very different presentation by our Chinese scholar. He argued that China had a consistent policy of shelving disputes for joint development, very long-standing one which he documented, and he noted that it had not aroused direct confrontation or conflict. It was U.S. involvement that caused strategic uncertainty. He has pointed out that China has promoted East Asia regional integration through economic linkages, the ASEAN +1, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the ASEAN +3, and the East Asia Summit, buffered by Track 2 diplomacy. So he saw that peace and stability in the South China Sea was a fundamental and prerequisite for the regional integration of East Asia. And he pointed to joint exploration, Gulf of Tonkin cooperation, cooperation on non-traditional security, marine environmental protection, as all activities that reinforce this. And he ended on a very positive note of 6 recommendations: to collaborate, to explore for resources in the South China Sea, to further implement the DOC, to engage in peaceful cooperation, not military confrontation, to promote non-traditional security cooperation, to integrate China and ASEAN economically, and getting outside countries to respect the universal norms to manage and support East Asia regional integration. During the question and answer period, and I conclude on this, I think 2 major points were made: that the South China Sea should remain an international sea. And secondly, that China's continued ambiguity on its own claims, U-shaped line, examined in detail in other panels, that China's continued ambiguity makes it virtually impossible to proceed on this issue until there's greater clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.